Calcutta, 1765. A warehouse. Crates marked pepper and silk are pushed against the wall like forgotten furniture. On the desk, a clerk is not logging goods. He is logging land. Acre by acre, village by village, tax assessment by tax assessment. Outside the door, a company sepoy stands guard with a musket. The guard is not there to protect the pepper. The guard is there to protect the receipt. The warehouse had stopped being a warehouse. It was now a tax office. And the company that owned it was not a company anymore. It was a government that had not admitted it yet. Follow the receipt. This is the East India Company. You probably know it as the trading monopoly that shipped spices and tea and eventually ruled India. But the moment that changed everything was not a battle. It was a piece of paper. August 1765. The Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II sits in a camp that is no longer entirely his. His army lost. His treasury is empty. A company officer places a document in front of him. It is called the Diwani. It grants a private corporation the right to collect land revenue from Bengal, the richest province in India. 30 million people. The emperor signs. The company gets a receipt. The emperor gets to keep a throne that now means very little. The company did not plan this. In 1600, when Queen Elizabeth I signed its charter, the East India Company was a spice business. 5 ships, a few investors, a promise to bring back pepper and nutmeg and not lose all the money in a storm. For 150 years that was the job. Buy cloth and spices in Asia. Sell them in Europe. Pay dividends. Repeat. But a spice company does not need an army. And by 1765 the company had an army. A big one. How did that happen? Go back to 1757. A place called Plassey. The company was not trying to conquer Bengal. It was trying to protect its trading posts from a local ruler, the Nawab, who kept interfering with company business. Robert Clive, a company officer with more ambition than diplomatic instinct, marched a small force up the river. He had about 3,000 men. The Nawab of Bengal had maybe 50,000. The battle should have been a massacre. It was not. Clive had made deals. The Nawab's own commanders took bribes and stood still. The battle started. The Nawab's army collapsed. The Nawab fled. Clive won. And suddenly, the company was not just a trading partner in Bengal. It was the power behind the throne. Nobody in London had voted on this. Nobody in London had even been asked. Here is where the ledger gets uncomfortable. The company had spent money on soldiers. Once you spend money on soldiers, you have to pay them. If you do not pay them, they mutiny. If you disband them, someone else takes your trade routes, so you keep the soldiers. And once you have soldiers, you look at the map differently. That town is not a trading partner anymore. It is a cost center that needs to generate revenue. That river is not a shipping lane. It is a supply line. That local ruler is not a customer. He is an obstacle. The army existed. Therefore it had to be paid. Therefore it had to be used. Therefore more territory was needed. Therefore the army grew. The cycle fed itself. On the map, this looked like strategy. In the warehouse, it was a food problem with flags. 7 years after Plassey, the cycle spun again. The Battle of Buxar. 1764. This time, the company faced the combined forces of the Mughal emperor and 2 other Indian rulers. The company won again. And now the emperor had a choice. Lose everything, or sign a piece of paper that gave a private company the right to tax his richest province. He signed. The ceremony was called an imperial grant. The receipt looked like a transfer of sovereignty written in invisible ink. The company now had the power to collect land revenue from Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. The tax was not a few coins at the market. Land revenue was the backbone of the Indian economy. Peasants paid a share of their harvest to the state. The state used that money to fund armies, build roads, maintain order. Now a private company in London was that state. The warehouse clerk stopped counting pepper. He started counting people. And here, the disaster begins. The company did not collect the taxes itself. It outsourced collection to local intermediaries called zamindars. The zamindars were supposed to assess the land, collect the revenue, keep a cut, and send the rest to the company. This system is called tax farming. It is efficient in the short term. It is catastrophic in the long term. Why? Put yourself in the zamindar's position. You have one incentive. Maximize your cut. You do not care whether the peasant can pay next year. You do not care whether the land is exhausted. You do not care whether people starve. You care about this year's collection, because next year the company might replace you with someone who squeezed harder. So you squeeze, and squeeze, and squeeze. The company got its revenue. Bengal got an extractive machine. And the shareholders in London got dividends. In 1771, the dividend was raised to 12.5%. Remember that number. It will come back. But there was another problem. The distance. Calcutta to London is 6,000 miles. In the 18th century, a letter took months. A decision took longer. The shareholders in London wanted profits. The company servants in India wanted personal fortunes. The servants had information the shareholders did not. The servants did things the shareholders would not have approved, and the shareholders only found out when the bills arrived. This is what economists call the principal-agent problem. The principals are the shareholders. The agents are the company servants. The agents are supposed to act in the principal's interest, but the agents are 6,000 miles away. They have guns. They have tax collectors. They have no meaningful oversight, so they act in their own interest. Here's what that looked like in practice. Company servants in Bengal started drawing bills of exchange on London. A bill of exchange is basically a check. The servant in India buys goods or pays expenses with company credit. The bill travels to London. The company in London pays it. The problem was the scale. In the year before the Diwani, the company's bills from Bengal totaled roughly £296,000. 1 year after the Diwani, £1.58 million. In 1 year, the bills multiplied by 5. The directors in London were horrified. They had not authorized this, but they honored the bills anyway. Why? Because if the company refused to pay, everyone would know the company was broke. Its credit would collapse. Its stock would crash. Its creditors would panic. So London kept paying. The agents in India kept spending. The shareholders kept demanding dividends. And 6,000 miles away in Bengal, the peasants kept paying taxes. Then the crops failed. The Great Bengal Famine of 1770. The rains did not come. The harvest died. An estimated 10 million people starved, roughly 1/3 of the population. The famine had multiple causes: drought, crop failure, the long decline of Mughal irrigation. But the company's tax policies made it worse. Much worse. Here is why. The company's revenue demands were fixed. The zamindars had to deliver a certain amount, famine or no famine. If they failed, they lost their position, so they kept collecting. The peasants had nothing. They collected anyway. People starved while the tax receipt was logged. People starved while the company noted the revenue shortfall in its ledgers and called it a temporary deficit. People starved while the bills of exchange kept flowing to London. And in London, in March 1771, the shareholders raised the dividend to 12.5%. I told you that number would come back. The company was collecting taxes from a province in famine, and the shareholders wanted more. The company paid both, the dividend and the famine. The dividend went to Threadneedle Street. The famine stayed in the villages. Economists have a phrase for this: a negative externality, a bloodless phrase for a blood-soaked reality. I hate that phrase every time I have to use it. But the bill was coming due. Not in Bengal, in London. The company was bankrupt. It had been borrowing heavily to pay its bills. Its debt was enormous. Its credit was stretched to the breaking point. In 1772, a credit crisis hit Europe. Banks started collapsing. 30 banks failed across the continent. At the center of the storm was the East India Company. Its bills of exchange were everywhere. Its debt was woven into the fabric of British finance. If the company failed, the banks would fail. If the banks failed, the government's own credit would fail. The company was too big to fail. Sound familiar? Parliament stepped in 1773. It passed the Regulating Act. The government bailed out the company with a loan of £1.4 million. But the bailout came with strings. The British government began to assert control over the company's affairs. A governor-general was appointed to oversee Bengal. The company's independence began to shrink. The pattern was set. Profit, debt, crisis, bailout. Each time the government took more control. Each time the company lost more of its sovereignty. The company that had stumbled into empire was now stumbling into irrelevance. The end came in 1858. After the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British government had had enough. The Government of India Act transferred all the company's territories, powers, armies, and property to the Crown. The company that had once ruled India was reduced to a shell. It kept a few offices, it managed a few accounts. It paid dividends for a few more years. In 1874, it was formally dissolved. The shareholders got their final payout. The warehouse was empty. So what actually happened here? The East India Company did not become a government because someone planned it. It became a government because the incentives pointed that way. Tax revenue is stickier than trade profits. Soldiers make collection cheaper than negotiation. And shareholders demand returns regardless of who pays. Once the company could write receipts like a government, it was a government. A government that answered to no citizens. A government accountable only to a dividend. The most dangerous business model is not the one that corners a market. It is the one that discovers it can tax. Because governments do not go bankrupt the way companies do. They just raise taxes. They just squeeze harder. They just log the receipt while people starve. The warehouse in Calcutta is gone now. The clerks are gone. The soldiers are gone. But the receipt is still there. The receipt that turned a trading post into an empire. The receipt that taught the world a lesson it keeps forgetting. If you give a company the power to tax, it will stop selling things. It will start collecting people. And there is no dividend high enough to pay for that.